time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mar.
And I'm Pizza.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast.
So, we've been treated to another bizarre situation where we have an absolutely unbelievably good AOR/rock album. But it's Synthwave again, and this is a very common case. The album in question today is At 1980's new album, all featuring Josh Daly as well, and some other special guests. But I believe it's confusing the way they list it on Spotify. I believe Josh Daly is a member of At 1980, but they list them both, I'm assuming, for the way the algorithm works. But point aside, algorithms aside, these are some banging classic rock tracks that they've actually given us. And then there's some really, really poignant instrumental pieces like the intro track and the outro track that are just really, really refreshing to hear. And I'm a bit confused because it's on New Retro Wave, and I thought New Retro Wave didn't really like the rock stuff, but how am I supposed to know, I suppose?
The other thing that's very interesting with like Synthwave in general is Synthwave is tagged as a genre electronic, but obviously all these songs are like classic rock songs. I'd be very interested, because it doesn't really tell you on Spotify. I'd be very interested to go to this album on iTunes and see what genre it says it is, because it's very, very hard to label like premium 80s style, classic rock and AOR and then say it's electronic music because it's an E-drum. It's like calling Royal Republic's new songs electronic music. Do you know what I mean?
What, simply because of the sound design choices that have been made?
It was because this is so far removed from Synthwave in many aspects.
It's hard because Synthwave occupies this type of music, but again, I think it's Synthwave, and this gets really muddly and messy because Synthwave is like meant to encompass the full 80s. So technically 80s power ballads are encompassed in what Synthwave is about. But again, as you say, Synthwave really, when it started, was more a mixture of house and like new wave sort of sound design. Not even really new wave songwriting, I didn't think. It was more, look, we got banging house drums with some like more retro samples, and we're going to use like these really lush polys over it instead of using, like the 90s sounds. So to me, as you're saying, it's like you listen to it and you go, yes, it can be Synthwave, but it really wants to be AOR. And I mean, Josh Daly on all of his socials is hashtagging AOR on all of these songs.
Yeah.
Because he's very much aware that it is AOR, and that's probably based off the influences that they've used to actually, get this sound and what they're trying to hone in on. They're probably thinking, or he's probably thinking, well, this is an AOR album, we're not pretending it isn't, but because of the way it gets released and all the genre tagging and the label it's on, it does come across as a Synthwave album.
I think the other thing that's very interesting is the way that particularly the AOR side of the 80s influence, we've talked about this before with like bands like Reckless Love, these heavier rock bands, leaning on Synthwave both visually but also like musically, because it's such an easy way for rock bands who would feel irrelevant to feel a little more relevant. And Synthwave is I wouldn't say it's a very popular internet genre, but it is popular. There's a lot of people listen to Synthwave, and you see people rocking the merch on YouTube shows and even on TV occasionally. You see just the style of the Synthwave visual art style in animated shows, in movies like Netflix. The Johnny Cage Mortal Kombat one, the Midnight, are talking about how it's all super 80s and synthwavy.
Yeah.
The visual art style is also really popping off, so it's very easy to get into, because anybody who sees any of these things says, what style is that? And then somebody says Synthwave. Then you go, Synthwave on Spotify takes you to Synthwave playlists. You discover the bands easier, and this is why people who want to make rock music, who get fed up of trying to figure out how to promote, like how do you even promote AOR to the right rock audience?
Because a lot of people don't even know what AOR is. That's
is it album orientated rock? Is it
arena
orientated rock? Some people will list it as like I know. I suppose I'm thinking more of adult contemporary rather than adult orientated. But it's like a muddled place, really, because a lot of people just say it's like 80s pop when it starts to get into AOR, because it's very hard to say some of the like classic 80s rock songs, like say Eye of the Tiger. It's very hard to say to somebody now that those songs aren't like pop songs, because they don't really have a super heavy rock feel. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think for a lot of people, the classic rock ballads have almost become the sound of the 80s, more so than a lot of the actual 80s pop.
I think because of the popularity of classic rock radio to younger people, maybe who wasn't old enough or wasn't born yet in the 80s, there's that retroactive thing of, well, this is the sound of the 80s. And I would have thought if you look back at the top 40, it wasn't, it will have been there, but it wasn't the dominant sound of the 80s. They had all that 80s pop. I mean, I feel like the stock Aikman Walkman stuff is just, people just don't remember it as much as maybe it was. I feel like that will have been one of the things that really did dominate the 80s.
Also, that somehow is less synthwave and more just house and pop.
I would say, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? The way, say, like those Kylie Minogue songs in the 80s.
Yeah. Maybe one of the only artists I can think that really leans on the stock Aikman Waterman sound is Michael Oakley. He's the only one I can even think of that actually does it on some of his songs.
Yeah, so I think you've got a lot of people looking for this like super chorus, clean guitar, rock power ballads with the synths, because that is the thing. Like when you think about a lot of these 80s rock bands, they all had keyboard players. They all had people with these vintage synths. And like, it's so strange that people are still using the Juno, the DX7, and any of like the Roland's digital synths or Yamaha's digital synths, because that's the keyboard you see on the music videos that all these classic rock bands had. They all had Junos, they all had DX7s. They had, I mean, you always hear them say about like the JX and the DO5. Because I'm looking at the boutique ones that are on our shelf and forgetting what the original ones are called, even though they're really similar.
Yeah.
But those are the sort of sounds that people want in synthwave, but that are also prevalent in all of the classic rock stuff. And I suppose it doesn't help that some of those classic rock bands leaned on drum machines as well.
Yes, well, that's where it gets messy now. If the classic rock bands didn't use drum machines, then it would be completely removed. But as you say, a lot of the classic rock bands did. They sequenced all the drums. A lot of them only really added guitar on some of the records, like choice pick records, I mean, you think about songs like St. Elmo's Fire or even like Danger Zone. There's a lot that isn't being played by people on them. There's a lot of sequenced parts. And that's where all this gets a bit entangled, because then you look in and the methodology of how At 1980 and Josh Dallas made this new record compared to some of the more technology embracing 80s rock bands, there is no difference in how they've made these, really. And a lot of them will have used digital tape and stuff like that, digital like recording software and computers in the late 80s as well. So really you're looking at, albums that are made the same way, the same sort of sonic aesthetic, and even the same mood. Like it's not like they're singing about computers and the online age. They're singing about these 80s subject matter as well. And that's why it's so bizarre that this is by de facto, and genres are meaningless, but it is by de facto synthwave and not rock, which is very bizarre to me still.
I'll tell you what, it's a very nice sounding album as well. I'm appreciating all the guitar work that's going into this, because that's what sets this apart from other synthwave tracks that I've heard that are trying to go for this sort of thing. This feels a lot more guitar orientated than other synthwave albums and projects.
Yeah. Well, I've really liked the other two albums, but this one seems like some sort of a level up, because I think on this one, it sounds like the level of like pastiching, like in terms of guitar tones and in terms of like the keyboard sounds and drum choices have really like been like leveled up essentially. Because, I mean, like you said, the guitar tones, what they're doing some really unusual stuff as well. Like the intro track, Lost in Time, has like the longest delay I've ever heard on.
Oh, yeah.
I thought there was like, I was like, what's going on? I was like, oh, it's like a full bar or more delay on the guitar. So it's like almost harmonizing, almost like Brian May style, harmonizing with himself. Especially when he starts shredding at the end, you're like, whoa.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I still think when you're trying to look for like new rock music, it seems so counterintuitive to go to synthwave and try and find it there. It's so strange. It's a bit like how people who want heavy metal start going into some of the really hardcore electronic music genres to look for heavy stuff that have like the throat singing and guitar riffs,
And
like
the vibes,
say
yeah.
Overkill comes to mind. I can never remember who does it. It's on Beat
Riot.
Saber. Oh, Riot. There we go. But yeah, that comes to mind because it's sort of that, but in a much different fashion. Like you have the heavy side, and obviously electronic instruments do heavy stuff really well, and then you can sequence it to make it extremely heavy. But it's weird because some of those, like that Riot track has, well, I think it has live drums. I would have to listen to it again.
I think there's just a live band in there somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting that bands like these rock bands keep looking at genres and go, how can we do something that nobody's hearing us do in this domain and take it to a different domain? And it somehow sticks a lot better because it's something different. It's a bit like how Pendulum made a sort of band version of drum and bass, and the novelty of it was so good, particularly when they did it, because there was like the first band I can really think of to do it in that way with a genre, a more modern genre like drum and bass, and do it to that level. And I think that's partly why Pendulum's so renowned, like in a lot of people's memories, is because it wasn't just somebody stood at a DJ deck.
Yeah, the only other act I can think of that does the same thing as Pendulum is Prodigy.
Yeah.
I don't know which one of them were out doing the live stuff first, but yeah, both of them seemed, I suppose that's where naturally at the time you would have thought electronic music would go that way, but instead it did go more DJ and producer focused and less, look, we're a band of people playing this, because I suppose it gets messy when you're trying to play it complicated electronic music live. I mean, it can be done, but I suppose the skill level and does anybody care sort of goes into account.
Yeah, I suppose that's where like a label comes in and says, we want one guy like Skrillex to do the full thing and tour the full thing instead of having to pay 6 guys to do the same thing. That's, I suppose, maybe why. And also you need 6 people to actually be on the same page and do it, whereas it's a lot easier to just do it by yourself, I think.
Yeah.
And it sounds awful to say, but I do think like with modern music and music production, there's a lot of one-man bands going around because it's not even that it's easier. It's about, can you find anybody who wants to share the same vision? And I think that's what makes it very hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've seen a lot of duos as well. I mean, this Josh Daly at 1984 collaboration is really good because Josh Daly's great solo. You know, he does great music solo, but I suppose maybe with that 1980, he can sort of tap into something that maybe he's not as good at, say, producing, like the nuances of it.
Yeah.
So maybe like he can just bring his songwriting, or maybe this is that 1980s thing and Josh Daly's just up for it. He's like, yeah, I can do that, so let's just do it. But I'd be very curious to see like who's bringing the AOR, because like I say, on the socials, Josh Daly is very AOR forward, and it sounds very AOR.
Because Josh Daly is singing, you would assume it would be him, but that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, because like you said, you would assume he would be bringing the words and the songs.
Yeah.
And then at 1980, the other guy would be bringing the music and the production. But it could be the other way around. I mean, there's cases of that. I mean, it always blows my mind with Fall Out Boy that Patrick Stump doesn't write the lyrics that Pete Wentz does. So it's and Elton John and Bernie.
Or even like Rush with Neil Peart writing the lyrics. That it's really interesting for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not always how you think it's going to be. It's not always how it looks from the outside.
Yeah.
But it's really nice that AOR is still getting some kind of albums. out. You know, I like the fact that Frontiers is still repping AOR in general as a genre. I do think you have to pick and choose what type of AOR or rock you want from Frontiers. But what's very interesting with new retro wave is there's sort of like a diamond in the rough every so often. Like there's like a really, really slamming sort of like album in this sort of territory. If you can look past all the cyberpunk and stuff, that's
there's a lot of cyberpunk stuff, yeah, and a lot of like heavier dance stuff coming out as well. Which I originally started listening to new retro wave further like house, slamming house with like 80s stuff going on. That's what I really liked. But it does seem, I think, with the sort of cyberpunk culture coming up because of the game and everything, I think some of the labels have leaned more into it because there'll be a lot of people making it as well. A lot of people will have been very inspired by the game, but also all the imagery. I mean, a lot of films were very cyberpunk and games very cyberpunk inspired going in the early 2020s, late 2010s. So I think it's just natural that became a style that came up in its own. But also the 80s stuff is bizarre because I keep expecting it to disappear.
Yeah. There's like a big push in like the top 40 sort of area for them to stick to 10 of the millennium and Y2K. That seems to be where the fashion, where the music choices is, where the names of songs and names of albums are all leaning into that.
But I feel like The Weeknd just messed that up for the entire industry.
Yeah, because The Weeknd like said, "Hold my beer. We're going full 80s with this one," and then everybody wanted to go back to that thing. The thing is that say when you look at a track like Blinding Lights, what that's doing that a lot of the top 40 wasn't doing is there was a lot of songs that was in 128 BPM, and Blinding Lights came out and went, "This song's fast," and then coming off that, you had a lot of fast songs in the charts that had more of that Danger Zone sort of tempo, that more upbeat thing, which is really nice because you don't want all of music to be one tempo.
That seemed so uncommon, and I'm sure we've said it before on this, but that did seem really uncommon until Blinding Lights came out.
So you do still have that effect. Like there's still songs coming out in the top 40 that have that style of 80s drumming, which really... I'm trying to think of a different genre or different time period that really had a lot of hits that had that type of rhythm in.
It would be Motown. That would be the only one I could think of, really, off the top of my head.
Which is more of like the Motown beat as well, where it's very straight, whereas I think what a lot of the chart songs do is that they have that like Hall and Oates rhythm or like you say, the Danger Zone type rhythm and speed.
Yeah.
That makes it feel, that puts it in that place, because also it's like the drum production.
Yes.
Because with Motown, you'd have a lot of soft air acoustic drums, and it's always like these slamming, 80s drum machines that you hear. So, yeah, this is that's the other thing, I suppose, with this album by At 1980. It's not going into that as much. It's very much in that, mid-tempo area where AOR really lives.
It's an album of ballads in the best possible way, because people struggle to tackle ballads and they've just mastered it, I feel like.
Yeah, it's also fun to have all the interesting sound design. I mean, there's a reason why the AOR bands that have like a little sprinkling of keyboard stick with you so much. I think it's just because they can bring a very different palette in, and that's what Journey has over a lot of the other classic rock bands, is they have just a very different sonic palette. Toto too, they have, because you have one of them on like a Eurorack modular synthesizer or whatever Steve Porcaro was using in the 80s. He had lots of different rigs, but he was doing atmospheres and effects and noises more so than melody and harmony.
Yeah.
So Toto has this, I don't want to say modern, but they have this thing that really a lot of people wasn't doing, because why would you have a synth and just do like noises, blips and atmospheres?
Why would you have just a chaos person in the band just doing bizarre sound design when the full thing is guitar music?
Yeah, so that's what makes some of those bands interesting, and that's sort of what Synthwave can tap into because it's so synthy. That's maybe what some of the bands on Frontiers don't do. Some of them maybe don't have a keyboard player. Not all of them, obviously. Work of Art's a great example of very techie synth design in classic rock sort of style music.
What I feel like really comes across with this at 1980 album is the reverb as well, like the production side. I feel like I hear a lot of songs like, this is a great example of what you would hear on Frontiers. You could hear the same song, but there wouldn't be reverb like this on the drums. It wouldn't have the atmospheres.
Yeah.
It'd just be recorded and produced fairly straight, fairly middle of the road, getting the job done for everybody. Whereas this is saying, no, we want like a 3-second reverb on these keyboards and stuff.
I do think some of the Frontiers albums, some of them are produced by some of the band members, some of them are more like done in-house, and the ones that are done in-house lack a little bit on like the effects. Nobody's gone out on a limb and said, we want a massive reverb on this song. They tend to be, like you say, fairly dry. Even if the songs are very like the same style as this, they don't tend to ham it up, because I suppose they're trying to be a rock label. They're not trying to be a pop label. Maybe that's what comes into it.
Yeah.
Maybe they say, well, we want it to be all about the instruments and not about us compressing and, doing stuff with the drums. But at the end of the day, a lot of the bands in the 80s had the most ridiculous snares in the game, didn't they? Like, I always think of the I Want to Break Free snare at the start of the song, and it's like a cannon shot with you could almost hold your breath for the length of time that the reverb tail is going for.
You see, I always think that song's really understated as well, but it really isn't on drums, is it? Especially on the single. The single mix is very, very 80s. I'm sure they tone it down slightly on the album version. But it's like the outro track, which is either A flat Eterna or Eterno or Ab Eterno. So A flat Eterno or Ab Eterno. We don't know.
Ab Eterno is definitely funnier. So.
Ab Eterno, I don't know, sounds more sci-fi, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that is just absolutely oozing with personality. And it's only a little instrumental, and it's got a little secret song at the end as well. But that, I stopped what I was doing when it came on the first time on Shuffle. I was like, holy crap, that's insane. Because it's just, it's not like, it's not insane in the same way like that some of the heavy electronic music is, where it's like a wall of sound. It's just the sound design and the space is so mesmerizing. It's the sort of thing you would expect to hear in like a climactic scene of Stranger Things, or even probably like an actual 80s film. Do you know what I mean? Like an 80s sci-fi movie. Yeah. That's how it sounds. It's just mesmerizing with how they've done it.
If for anybody who's seen the musical film Rock of Ages, it's like the bits that they have in the background of when the actors are talking to each other.
Yeah, like in between the songs, they have the best music going, don't they?
And I believe. Oh, I know it's somebody from. Was it Joel Holst? Yeah, Holst. I can never say his last name. From Night Ranger and Holstre. I'm going to say. I think he did some of the guitar shredding, and what they have on Rock of Ages basically is to amp up the like LA scene where they're all doing these like Twisted Sister style rock bands. Is they just have like a few pad synths and then just somebody shredding on guitars when there should be silence, really.
Yeah.
And
it should be like orchestral music.
Yeah, it's just so good. It's so good to listen to, and you're like, where's that album? Where's the people who doing that on like the intro of a song? Because it's the sort of stuff that people are really good at doing it for like the bits, but then when it comes to including it into like an actual piece of like album sort of content, people go, no, we can't do that.
It's too much.
It's too much. That's what I really like about one of the Eclipse songs. I'm trying to think about which one it is. On Armageddon Eyes, it might be Blood of the Enemy.
Yeah, I think so.
That has just like a 1:30 intro where it's just like atmosphere and shredding. It's just really, really cool. And that's the sort of stuff, right? With the TikTok or streaming culture, every song has to be 3 minutes on the dot or 2 minutes 10, God forbid. Those are the things that get cut, and those are the things that you don't hear anymore.
Especially like when the instrumental intro on this album is like
it's longer than Speed Drive by Charlie XCX.
Yeah. I mean, and the outro instrumental is like twice as long as Speed Drive.
People don't seem to have time for this sort of like soundscaping where you're creating a mood. Like the reason people did this in the first place, I think, is to put you in like a headspace before the song starts.
I think as well, maybe cynical of me to say, it was to fill time in concerts probably. It'll be like, right, we need a song where like the singer can like get a drink and get changed.
Yeah, and in all fairness, like when you think about it from a live perspective, a lot of people now are shooting themselves in the foot because it's all vocal for 2 minutes 10 and then the next song starts and it's the same. And I do feel like, particularly in like the pop domain, they're not giving themselves chance to breathe.
Yeah.
And it's got to be, 100% in and then out. And there's no like breathing room, particularly with like the chart stuff. So that's what's nice when people let songs breathe. Now, obviously, if every song's 5 minutes, it can become tedious. So there's like a balancing act. But I do think it's nice if you just even get like 20 seconds intro on some of the songs just to create a vibe.
I think because they've gone for, on Forget to Remember, the At 1980 album, I don't know if we've actually said the title much more than once. On this, they've got like 11 tracks. They've got a bunch of like vocal orientated, like straight up songs. And then it's sort of peppered with some of these instrumentals that just gives you like a good balance. Because I think when you're talking about album sequencing, a full instrumental album for me is too much. And
yeah,
in some of the genres like synthwave and even like rock, sometimes I don't mind an instrumental track on an album because it can be refreshing sometimes, especially if you've got like 6 like pure pop or pop rock style in terms of songwriting and arrangement that just hit you really hard, and then they give you something to let you breathe a second when you're listening through an album. That can be quite nice. But what they've done on this album is just done a really well sequenced album, a well punctuated album that allows for this indulgence in terms of like the cleans and the pads and sustains, because this album actually lets like, everybody loves a bit of reverb on the snare, but this album actually is the right tempo for that reverb to happen and not just flood the mix as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they've done really, really well.
Yeah, it's just very spacey, isn't it? Like you say, when they keep doing these like motifs and just letting the reverb and the delays just be themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like they're just they're letting them carry the space, aren't they?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just really nice. It's been a very, very cool album just to listen to all the way through whilst we've been doing this podcast as well. But it's refreshing because I really like this style of rock music. And the problem with this style of rock music is I feel like it's very hard to find it. And a lot of the times, if it's there, you're not aware that it's there. Like it's always hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, and it can be very hard to nail the brief with this type of rock music.
Yeah, because you can have like ballady rock and you can have it like, we put the Storm's debut album on like a pedestal for that is like the vibe. And this sort of, there's elements of like what the Storm was doing that you sort of hear in this. Yeah. But the other thing that's really refreshing about AOR sort of revival music is that, AOR was obviously like literally cut off by the nose by grunge, and it just sort of stopped, and it didn't sort of slowly, saturate to a point where everybody got fed up of it. It just got ended.
It also didn't have a chance to evolve, really, did it?
Yeah, we sort of hit the end game of AOR in like 91, and by 93 it was like, you're done. That's not cool anymore. So it's really nice to hear people doing that type of music because you almost think that this is what people could have been doing by, say, 97 or whatever. Particularly once... It's crazy, but there's not really any technology in any of these songs that didn't exist in the 90s because they had the drum machines. They had the big recording studios and the digital recording studios. You maybe didn't have home studios. It wasn't accessible, but... you had all the instruments. It's not like there's a newfangled instrument being used in any of these productions that didn't exist.
Yeah, that is something that is bizarre, though. Like, can you imagine what they could do if like, there was a newfangled thing that just came out? Well, I mean, the only thing that anybody can think of is the, like, Massive and any...
you have, like, Massive, Serum... Omnisphere, those are the types of synths that people talk about when they talk about like next generation synths. But like in the hardware domain, we haven't really had a drum machine surpass the TR-808. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You haven't really had something that becomes the sound. You've had stuff like trap hats and like those sort of kits.
But they can be done with anything, any old technology.
And a lot of those songs are done with 808s.
Yeah.
You know, even if they're sampled, they're not maybe using the sequencer for an 808, but they are using the sounds. So I do think it's hard. You haven't really got like a universally loved piece of music software, or well, I mean, I suppose music software. Yes, you've got Massive, haven't you? Which created the full 2010 sort of dance scene.
Yeah,
but like in the hardware domain that people would use, like in a recording studio, you don't really have something that sort of tops the TR-08. And if you think about that coming out in like the 80s.
The closest thing I can think of is the Uda Super 6 or Super 8. I can't remember how many models there is, because that is binaural. It's just a synthesizer, proper workstation synthesizer, a bit like a Juno, but with advanced technology and binaural output. So it can spin around your headphones and everything. But again, that's something that it's more of a compilation of different elements that then specifically, oh my God, this is nothing we've ever heard before. And we were saying earlier, wasn't we, just to ourselves about these physical modeling synth engines, a bit like Object by Reason Studios and, what was it called? Atom, I think, by Baby Audio. They're, they're trying something new, but it's just whether to physically model stuff, can you actually, can you break the rules in physical modeling?
That's the problem with it, isn't it? Is because it's trying to be natural in a room. Whereas what I think makes all the keyboards of the 80s so good, particularly when you start getting into like romplers in the 90s, is they was just going off on one trying to make the most synthetic and unnatural sounds possible. And that's where you get all these like magical 80s plucks and these string synths that sound nothing like string instruments, the brass polys,
Yeah.
It's bad emulations that make good sounds. So if you get too close, like with the physical modelling stuff, and it sounds like an actual glockenspiel, it kind of makes you go, what's the point? Because I can just get an actual glockenspiel.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely ways with Object, which I've had a tinker with. There's ways to make it sound like larger than life and unnatural, but I think, again, some of these synths, like Object, is something where you'd have to have a stupid degree to know how to use it.
Yeah.
They're very complicated.
So I'd be very interested if anybody could, if any piece of music equipment could actually sort of get to a level of use that, say, the TR-808 has and the TB3 has for like creating genres, because there's a lot of new drum machines and synthesizers that come out every year, but how many of them create a new genre in of itself that is completely made using that box? And that's why I say that we don't have these things, because no single drum machine or keyboard has invented a soundscape that people go, this is a completely new genre.
With the exception of Massive / Serum /
Yeah,
Silence.
but that is digital, but that is part of it as well. But yeah, Massive is the main one, really.
They're the only, that's the only phase in time where a genre that did not exist in any form was invented through a piece of software or anything that, had such a huge impact on music and culture. I'd love to see more people do that, but I suppose the main selling point for a lot of these VSTs is, well, you like this vintage piece of hardware, this does that in the box, and same with like the synths. So it's hard to market a product that's completely original because people go, well, why would I need that?
So that's been our thoughts on Forget to Remember by At 1980 featuring Josh Daly. Check it out, and there's some really interesting like AOR dubstep towards the end of this album. I'm going to coin just for a
AOR
bit of
dubstep, is that because System Glitch is getting involved on
it's on Let Me Go, and the Magic Wand was having a bit of that, and it's very interesting. But yeah, check it out. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next week.